today we're diving into a really provocative YouTube video, one that makes some incredibly bold claims about fatherhood. Now, our job here isn't to agree or disagree with it. Instead, we're just going to break down the arguments piece by piece so we can all understand the perspective it's putting forward. So, let's get into it. And there it is. That's the shocking claim right at the heart of the video. It's a massive statement for sure. So, throughout this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly what the source means by this and take a close look at the evidence it uses to build its case. So, to make sense of this pretty dense argument, here's the roadmap we're going to follow. We'll start with that main claim, then we'll explore the source's ideas on marriage and parenting, dig into the historical backstory it provides, and then finally, see how it all supposedly ties together in what the video calls a generational cycle. Okay, so what is the core argument here? Well, the source claims that a very specific cultural and historical context has basically created a negative model for what it means to be a father. And it's important to note, the video really frames this not as a critique of individuals, but of a whole system of values it says is just widespread. The video paints a very, very specific picture of this horrible father. It describes a man who, it claims, is taught to be physically domineering, to put his ego way ahead of emotional maturity, and to communicate through aggression, screaming. The source also argues this model encourages having children with multiple women, which ultimately results in fathers who are, for all intents and purposes, emotionally and educationally absent from their kids' lives. All right, so the argument really starts to build from here by setting up a contrast between two very different ideas about what marriage and partnership are all about. And here you see that stark contrast the video presents. On one side, you've got the European model, as the source calls it, which it defines as a partnership based on love and equality. But then it contrasts this with what it labels the African model, describing it as a hierarchical system based on duty, where love isn't even a requirement. In this view, relatives and the extended family come before the couple. A man can have multiple wives, and a wife's main role is to be controlled and have lots of children to, elevate the man's status. Okay, so if that's the view on marriage, how does that trickle down into parenting? Well, the video argues that these completely different approaches to partnership create a major, major disconnect in what parents actually value for their children. And to illustrate this, the source drops a really surprising statistic. It claims that a whopping 70% of Gen Z in several African nations can't write a proper essay in their own local language. The video uses this point to argue that a fundamental part of their culture and education is actually being lost right at home. This slide really gets to the heart of the source's critique on parenting. It alleges that while European parents are focused on things like saving for the future and teaching critical thinking, this other model prioritizes just having more children over truly investing in them. According to the source, teaching the Bible and demanding total submission to elders become way more important than fostering emotional support or helping a kid find their own unique strengths. So you might be asking, what's the source's explanation for why these differences exist? Well, it points to a combination of historical and religious factors that it argues have shaped this particular worldview over a long, long time. The video introduces this really fascinating idea it calls third-hand learning. The argument goes something like this. European languages were taught by non-native speakers, who themselves learned from other non-native speakers. And the end result, according to the source, is a whole population that isn't truly fluent in either their local language or their adopted one, which, as you can imagine, leads to some major communication barriers. The source also claims that Judeo-Christian values were essentially misused. It argues that certain ideas from the Bible, which it's quick to note was written by men in a patriarchal society, were basically cherry-picked to justify worldviews that already existed. The video specifically points to passages about female submission, servitude, and tribal warfare as key examples of this. And it doesn't stop there. The video also points to the adoption of Western names as more evidence of this. It claims this was all part of a colonial effort to label local languages and beliefs as satanic, which then pushed people to adopt European names to seem more educated and more Christian, even if they couldn't actually pronounce them correctly. So, what's the end result of all this? The source pulls all these different threads together to describe what it calls a self-perpetuating cycle, one with some really serious consequences. Here's exactly how the video lays out that cycle. A man fathers children that he then doesn't support, neither financially nor emotionally. So these children grow up with a father who is, for all intents and purposes, a stranger. And then, without a different example to follow, the source argues the children, especially the sons, are very likely to just repeat the exact same pattern. And this alleged cultural cycle has real, tangible financial consequences, according to the source. It claims that in some countries, over 90% of people have no savings, no inheritance, and no life insurance. It also alleges that when there is an inheritance, it's often just sold off, with the money spent on things like parties and nightclubs instead of being invested back into the family's future. And that's our breakdown of this very, very challenging video. The source presents a deeply controversial and pretty unsparing critique of fatherhood, and it really leaves us with a heavy question to think about. What can a perspective like this, no matter how difficult it might be to hear, reveal about the complex and often messy collision of tradition, colonialism, and the challenges of modern parenting?